Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Hyperion Hub, your meeting place for all things Disney. Now your hosts.
Hello and welcome to the Hyperion Hub. I'm John Alois, and I'm joined by Sean Degenhart.
Hi there.
And John Redlingschafer.
Hello, hello.
You know, we like to start our show off with our Disney views. And this week, let's kick it over to John for his.
Thanks, John. And really, I'm looking to our listeners for some help this week. So often we come up with some fun topics, some serious topics, historical, music, doesn't matter. But we want to look to our listeners and never be shy about what you may be thinking of or for a show idea or what we haven't covered. Just so you know, coming up, we are looking at a few fun topics. What's your favorite mode of transportation at a Disney park? What food must you have when you go to a Disney park, whether that be a restaurant or at the theme park? Or even, and this has been a contentious point between a couple of us here, Mr. Alois thinks you should go a certain direction when you go into the World Showcase, and he is 100% wrong. It's just that simple. And so we'll take a quick gander around the World Showcase and the way you should go in a later episode. But for right now, I think just kind of for way of a teaser, guys, what food must you have when you go to Disneyland or Disney World? What's always on your list?
You want one item or just kind of the list?
This is your list, man. Go with what you want.
Okay, this is the quick list. Mickey bar, pretzel, the red velvet cupcakes are fantastic. Steak at the Grand Floridian Cafe, taco from Pecos Bill's. You got to get a hot dog from Casey's.
Hold on.
Pomegranate lemonade and Mickey waffles.
You were ready for this. Goodness gracious.
We're not going to have enough material for the show. Hold some of that.
I love it.
You know, I love how he started with treats because that's the first place my mind went as well. It's churros in Disneyland and it's Dole Whips in Walt Disney World for me.
I had my first turkey leg at my last trip. That was a meal or a couple meals in and of itself.
Yeah, that's something.
I can't do that. Even the thought of that.
I didn't finish it.
But listen, we want to hear what you think. What are your favorite food items when you go to the Disney parks? Email us at podcast@thehyperionhub.com or send us a voice recorded message. Well, guys, I'm so excited. Our guest for the show is part of the Diz Unplugged network. I've been a listener for the Diz for over a decade, so I've been waiting for this interview. We're so excited to welcome the host of Connecting with Walt, Michael Bowling. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on the Hyperion Hub. Congratulations on the launch of your great show. I enjoy listening to it.
Thank you. That's awesome coming from you. And I'm sure you understand the background and the significance for the name Hyperion, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The Hyperion Studios.
Michael, this is a unique Disney history show that you have. Tell us about Connecting with Walt and how you came up with the idea for the podcast.
Gosh, that goes way back to when the Diz Unplugged had a Disneyland show. And it was an audio show. And I started out as a listener. I was just a fan of the Diz. And I started writing articles for the Diz based on the Walt Disney Family Museum and sort of what was going on there. And then I was asked to come on the Disneyland show. I don't know, they must have had a hole in their schedule to talk about their Snow White exhibition. And I did that. A couple weeks later, I was asked to come back on the show. And Tom Bell, who was the host and producer at the time, he said, okay, we want you to fully participate in the show. And he told me exactly what I needed to prepare for. And I told my wife, Carol, I think I'm being auditioned, but I'm not sure. And so I fully participated. And by that time, I knew everybody on the show. I was friends with all of them. So it was just sort of like old home week. And I did my thing. And Tom thanked me. And then a couple weeks later, I didn't hear anything. He contacted me and said, before I go to Pete Werner, who's founder and one of the owners of the Diz, he said, before I go to him, I want to know if you would like to be a full-time member of the show. And I said, sure. And Pete approved it. Then the 60th anniversary of Disneyland came along. So I started a series on the 60 years of Disneyland. And that caught the attention of a lot of people, including the people that listened to the flagship show of the Diz, the Walt Disney World show. And they said, we would like to hear the history of Walt Disney World. And so Pete and I got together, we talked about it, and Connecting with Walt was born out of that. And I said, but I don't want it to just be about Walt Disney World. I want it to be about all things Disney. And so it started out as a event podcast, as we called it. And it came out 4 times a year for 1 month. And that ran for a year, and it exceeded expectations. And then Pete said, okay, fine, it's going to be a weekly show. And luckily, and Craig was my co-host and producer, who has a vast knowledge of Disney history. And we just clicked, right away. He's younger, so he has a lot of Disney knowledge that really complements my Disney knowledge, because I call myself the old man of the Diz. I'm the oldest one in the Diz. I first visited Disneyland when the park was 2 years old.
Wow.
Wow.
I've experienced most Disney history, at least where Disneyland's concerned.
Is that where the passion started for you?
I think it was. I always joke that because I was 1 year old when my family took me to Disneyland. And I always said, when Tinkerbell flew across the park, I must have gotten some of that pixie dust in my bloodstream. Because, I was a Disney fan my whole life, really. So that's how Connecting with Walt was born, a very long story. And I think we're getting into our 4th year now, and just continue to grow.
I have to say, the deep dives that you guys do on the show are just remarkable. And you mentioned the Hyperion name. Well, one of the first episodes I ever listened to was back in 2017 when you talked about the Hyperion Studio. So I knew, and I knew I had to go back before that. And sure enough, talking about Marceline, talking about just so much and so deep, the analysis is just fantastic. I have to ask, do you have a favorite person you've interviewed related to the Connecting with Walt show?
Oh my gosh, that's hard because we've interviewed so many different people. And I'm almost afraid to say it in case somebody's listening. And
Fair enough.
Everybody is a joy. And I'm so humbled that they agree to be on the show. And then I have my list of people I still want to be on the show. I want to have on the show. Sam, there's a couple I think they're probably now at that stage in their life, they're not doing interviews anymore. But Rolly Crump was a delight, absolute delight to have on the show. So when you have somebody like that who worked with Walt on the show, that is special. We've had Bob Gurr on several times. So that they're just a league of their own.
I just saw Rolly. I was in preparation of Halloween. I watched that, the Tencennial Disneyland show on YouTube, and he goes and talks with Roland, as he calls him, about the, he kept forgetting, Walt kept forgetting that it's the Haunted Mansion. He's the House of Illusion. Yes. And, so
he did, and that's so funny.
Roland? I want you to meet Julie Reams. She is Miss Disneyland Tencennial. This is Roland Crump, who for the project here is sort of acting as the interior decorator of a house of illusion. What do we call it? Mark, I want you to meet Julie Reams. Mark Davis.
Very nice to
Julie is Miss Disneyland Tencennial. And Mark Davis is the master in charge of our House of Illusions, or what do we call it?
A Haunted Mansion.
Haunted Mansion and Supernatural.
There's a story behind that whole episode. There was a script for it, and they had cue cards ready and everything, and Walt immediately went off script. and nobody knew what he was going to say. You could even see Julie Reams the Disneyland ambassador didn't even know how to react a couple of times to him because she wasn't prepared. And, Marty Sklar, when I talked to him, he said, you just try writing for that man because you never knew what Walt was going to say when he was, in front of the camera. And that was a classic episode where Walt just ignored everything that had been prepared for him. And you're right. And because he wasn't going by, he was off script, he completely forgot the name of the attraction.
Like several times.
Yes, multiple times. And Marty Sklar was just gritting his teeth.
I'm just wondering if you've got anything special prepared looking ahead to Disney World's 50th anniversary next year, if you have any special projects.
I'm sure we will. The thing is, we've been covering Walt Disney World really since our first episode, when we talked about what was Walt's vision for Walt Disney World and then how it became what it is today. Right now, we did the whole history of the Magic Kingdom. And, when I researched that, I am in such awe of how they took the muck and the swamp that was there and what it is today. It's amazing. And it was the largest civil engineering project in the history of the United States at that time. And then right now we're covering the history of Epcot, and we're up to the Horizons Pavilion right now. So on that day, I don't know, because it's almost like we covered the actual event already on the show, so I haven't thought about it yet.
Can you talk about some of the extensive research? I mean, you put so much into every episode. I don't know how you do it, because it's almost like writing a book, per episode. How do you tackle that on a weekly basis and have that much material?
It's not easy because I have a full-time job, which also a lot of research is involved in that as well. And then, unfortunately, my wife, who passed away, when you listen to those early episodes, I always refer to her as my lovely research assistant. Yeah. She did a lot of the online research for me. And then I have books everywhere. There are libraries in most of the rooms in this house. And I have a fairly good-sized home. I plan ahead. I have a whole spreadsheet of the year. And I never thought I'd get to the point where I'm reading 4 books simultaneously, which I do. And I just switch back and forth between them. I'm reading 2 right now because we're doing a Halloween series as we record this episode. I don't have a lot of free time. And I love gardening. And I'm even sometimes listening to things as I garden. It might be soundtracks to things, or it might be videos that I'm listening to that are history videos, or interviews I'm listening to as I garden. I read every single day, and weekends I read a lot. And then it's doing the online research. So that I'm done with my day job, then I'll put in time researching before I make dinner or do chores and things like that.
We all love to be entertained, but you guys, as you're talking about, when you do your digging and your deep dives, you're fair and you're sharing your opinions. But before you do that, I feel that you truly try to educate yourselves. It might be a silly question for a history podcast, but how important is the truth? Because we can skirt over certain things or we can try not to cover certain things. But I think the truth is important. I think you do too. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And usually if I can't verify a fact from 3 different resources, sometimes it'll be 2 if I already know it's true. I don't use it in the show. Also, Craig and I, you've listened to the show. We don't do this, what would Walt think? Or we don't like to speculate on what was Walt thinking unless it is really educated. Because, we've interviewed enough people who worked with Walt, or I've sat down and spoken with Marty Sklar a few times, where even the people who worked closest with Walt had no clue what he was thinking. So that's why there is a in some circles, there's a very well-respected biography on Walt, a very heavy biography of Walt. And there is so much speculation in it that I don't respect it. And neither did actually Diane Disney Miller. And she refused to carry it in the Walt Disney Family Museum and was appalled that it was being sold in the parks, and shared her feelings with Bob Iger. That's why I didn't care for the American Experience mini documentary they did on Walt, because there was so much speculation in it. And there were a lot of good film clips, though. But
very rare film clips, correct.
Yeah, getting at the truth is difficult. That's why writing about post-Walt is also difficult doing shows, because everything was done by committee then, and not as much was documented. So it's so much harder to research on post-Walt, because everything with Walt, everything went through Walt. Walt was the decision maker. If you ever see that org chart that somebody did.
At the Walt Disney Family Museum, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's available online and stuff, where everything, Walt was at the top and everything went around him. Well, once he was gone, it's so much harder to find out how are things created, what was the thought process. And there was no character. There are not as many humorous stories. Tony Baxter, at least he sort of carries the torch now that Marty's gone, for a lot of the humorous stories, how the attractions were created and the history of them.
I think there was so much stress placed on everybody who was left, because they rolled right into Walt Disney World, and then they didn't know what to do. They were trying different things with films, and nothing was really hitting the way it once had. And, they kind of lost their way for a little while, and then they found it again. But it is frustrating. I have to say, as a guy who studies Walt as well, it's frustrating to see people say things online like Walt would be rolling in his grave, or what would Walt think? Yeah. Walt evolved so much from the 1920s to the 1960s, and there were people who were so close to him who didn't know what he was going to say. Who knows what he would have accomplished, had he kept going. So,
because Walt loved technology. Walt was a realist. Even with the heartbreaking layoffs that are happening now as a result of the pandemic, when you go back in history, after every major project, whether it was a film or a theme park attraction being built, there were layoffs at the Walt Disney Studio. And some of them, as I researched, I'm doing a lot of research on the early days of animation right now, because we're doing a history of animation as well. We have a series on that running. It's shocking, some of the people that we revere nowadays who created those early films were laid off sometimes a couple of times. And it happens. So sometimes you have to be careful not to put a halo on Walt as well. So who knows what Walt would have done. He might have changed his mind about Epcot, the city. As time went on, we don't know. We have no idea.
Right.
And I think when you've got a big group like that suddenly living in Walt's shadow, nobody wants to be the one to make the decision. They want to have the cover of this was a group decision, so that they're not sticking their necks out on the line.
Sounds like Congress, doesn't it? Yeah. And they rolled for years on Walt's projects that were already in motion or already been planned. Yeah, and when they got to that moment when suddenly they had nothing and they had to start creating their own things, that's when in those late 70s, that's when we sort of started to see, okay, things look a little shaky right now.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s are just fascinating.
I was just saying how I so appreciate the balance that you guys do on the show of trying not to put words or thoughts in Walt's mind or voice, yet also explaining the legacy at times. There are multiple episodes where you mention Cal Arts, and I absolutely love when you will go into that to show how big of a community advocate he was, especially for the arts. And so while not doing what we, don't necessarily want to do, you still have a wonderful way of explaining what his legacy is outside of Disney as well.
Absolutely. He left a significant part of his estate to Cal Arts. He wanted to see that built. That was one of his dying wishes, was to see Cal Arts built and to see Epcot continue. But Cal Arts was the big one. He wanted to nurture artists in every area, not just animation. And he really wanted that to be his legacy. That, and he wanted to be known as a storyteller. Out of everything that he accomplished, he wanted to be remembered as a storyteller.
I also want to compliment you, Michael, on what you guys do. In addition, you wear many hats, even for the Diz. I believe on multiple episodes you mentioned your past as an educator, and during this time, I have to thank you. I know there were a few, formal episodes, maybe the wrong word, but you spent time, and there was a Diz board actually on this topic. Your calming, soothing voice reading stories. My kids loved it, and it was just a wonderful break from the stress and pressure that even a child is feeling during these difficult times. So I just feel like that the public, or our listeners, however you want to say it, really doesn't fully appreciate what you guys do at the Diz, and you personally, for not just Disney fans and the Disney community, but during tough times, you're that calming presence, and we appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind, very generous of you. I wish my co-host and producer Craig could be here. They're having an outage, a power outage where he is at the moment. But he's the one that wears many hats at the Diz. We are bringing back Storytime with Michael. We're very excited. It's going to be in a different iteration. And we actually have members of the Connecting with Walt family are involved in it. We have artists who are contributing artwork, so you're not just looking at me. And we even have a composer who's going to be writing background music for the stories. And we're taking it a little different direction because we don't have to worry about copyright.
Right.
We are going to read the original stories, and which are not under copyright, the original fairy tales, which probably, I would say, majority of people have not heard the originals. Mm-hmm. We only know the Disney version. When I was getting my teaching credential, I had to take a course. It was on sort of let's just say the mythology of children's stories and the psychology of children's stories. And I was the only one in the classroom that had ever read the original stories. So after I read the stories, then the originals, then I'll tell a little about how Walt adapted them for film. Walt did significant adaptations in order to make them a little more family friendly.
Disney-fied them a little bit.
Yes, but I'm not reading the Grimm Brothers versions because they were grim.
I was going to say, I may rethink my younger children watching that episode. Yeah.
Now, I'm reading mainly the Charles Perrault versions because there are, people don't know, there are different versions of Cinderella, of Sleeping Beauty, of Beauty and the Beast. And they were all morality tales. They all meant to tell children a lesson. And some, they hit the children over the head with the lessons. They would give them nightmares. Perrault was a little more gentle in telling his stories. And Disney did Cinderella is based on the Perrault version.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah.
Craig is located in Central Florida, and you're located in Central California. Do you think that lends a unique perspective to the show?
Absolutely, and there's also a significant age difference between Craig and I. And that also is a difference, which is great. And then because of where we're located, I'm more of a Disneylander, and Craig is a Walt Disney Worlder. So we come at it from different perspectives as well. So we lean on each other for that information a lot of times. Although I went to Walt Disney World when I was, a teenager. So I remember a lot of attractions that Craig wasn't born for, Walt Disney World as well.
You got to see both of these theme parks when they were glistening, brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they're not well kept today, but everything was fresh and new. What was the biggest difference? I mean, what did you feel when you walked into the Magic Kingdom? It must have felt so sprawled out. What were some of those big differences?
The size, absolutely the size. And like, I think it was Rolly Crump that said, when you walk into Disneyland, you feel like you're being hugged. And because Disneyland has that forced perspective, so you really feel surrounded by Main Street. Whereas the Main Street in the Magic Kingdom, because remember, Disneyland was built, there was already a town around it. Anaheim was there. So whereas at Walt Disney World, there was no support environment. So the Magic Kingdom is regular size because they needed to have offices and things like that. So there are offices on the second floor of Main Street and all that. So it's a little different walking in there. The first time I walked in there, I didn't feel that intimacy. Also, you do feel, and I know this is cliched, but you do feel Walt's presence at Disneyland. It's that intangible feeling that's hard to describe if you haven't been there. But just the enormity of it. Whereas, at Disneyland, you can, if you're in Frontierland and you want to see what the line is like, well, this was before, everything, there were the apps. You wanted to see what the line was like at Space Mountain. You just ran across the Central Plaza. Not at Magic Kingdom. I mean, that's a hike to get over there and see. But then I love the facade of the Haunted Mansion. It's magnificent, and it's so large and foreboding. With that brick, we don't have brick in California because of earthquakes. So I just thought it seemed much more frightening than ours at Disneyland. And I love Liberty Square. It's my favorite. It's funny. New Orleans Square is my favorite land. At Disneyland, Liberty Square is my favorite land at Walt Disney World for Magic Kingdom. I also love that the submarine ride at the time looked like the Nautilus. Mm-hmm. And whereas, ours had to look like the General Dynamics subs because they said, we're building them. They're going to look like our submarines. And they built them like their submarines. Those things were built to last, which is why we still have the attraction. So I love both parks. They're both magical in their own way. It's unfortunate that Roy Disney sort of, after Walt died, Walt didn't want to repeat. First of all, he didn't want to repeat an exact duplicate of Disneyland. And in fact, Roy had to convince him we needed a theme park if you want to build your city, because we have to generate revenue. And we need to bring people on property if they're going to head over to the international area of Epcot in order to generate money as well, which was the international area was going to be shopping and restaurants. It was going to be open to the public. But Fantasyland was going to be completely different. There are going to be different attractions. And then afterwards, after Walt passed, and Roy got a little nervous, was Walt Disney World going to be popular to East Coast folks? So he made the attractions. They were already tried and true, and popular in Disneyland. And so he said, just build the same thing at Magic Kingdom. So at least the Imagineers built different versions of them. And you had that wonderful Mr. Toad attraction that had two different experiences. And what a shame that it's gone.
Looking back at Mr. Toad and how they were able to expand, within the last 10 years, I just wish it would have happened decades earlier. That would have been able to save it. Winnie the Pooh could have gone deeper into Fantasyland if they were thinking ahead that much. But what you're talking about, as far as Disneyland having that Walt feel, and I agree with you. I also, though, think that along with your podcast, every park that's been built since Disneyland does have that Disney inspiration or Disney feel to it, so it all does kind of tie back to the men who started it all, Walt and Roy, to me.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I've been to all the theme parks. I've been very lucky. And I agree. They all have Walt and Roy's touch in them. Even Shanghai, which is the most unique of all the parks, it still has the Disney touch in there. It's very unique. There's a familiarity to every one of the parks, but each of them has their own charm.
We love connecting with Walt. It's too bad Craig couldn't be with us. I can tell you this, and please pass this along. My 15-year-old son is the biggest Craig Williams fan in the world.
Oh, gosh. Okay, you have to tell me, what does he like about Craig?
He likes the fact that Craig is Craig. You know, he never hides his true emotions. He's very authentic. Craig shares his experiences, and he likes to tie everything back into whatever you guys are talking about. You know, one thing that I appreciate about Craig that my son probably doesn't even understand, Craig produces like 150 shows a week. I mean, he
does. I don't know when he sleeps. I absolutely don't.
The Diz Unplugged network is pretty large, and Craig has his hand in all the shows, I think, or pretty much all of them. And he shoots those wonderful videos.
You know, we are, there's nothing I can talk about right now, but we're going to be making changes to Connecting with Walt in the new year. And we're already starting to experiment a little. So if those go well, Craig's probably going to end up doing more for our show. What I like about Craig on Connecting with Walt is you also see it or hear a side of him that maybe you don't on the other shows. And I think more of his humor comes out. He and I we both have a, I don't know, sarcastic sense of humor. I tend to keep mine in check as the host, but when we're off mic, we tend to let it go.
I could see that. I could see that creeping in a little bit. And I also think he appreciates learning about history. And I'm sure, you know, on a weekly basis, he kind of just sits back and listens to you talk about all these things that make Disney what it is today. It has a strong foundation, and it's because of people and the places that you talk about that they are succeeding still today.
Oh yeah, we have that little segment we do this week in Disney history. And I don't know how Craig has that much history in his head. I would not do as well if it was reversed, because I'm just at that point. I don't keep the minutia in my head that he does with dates. Like he goes, 1971? Oh, that must be. And he knows that obscure pavilion or that it's what film opened that year. I just don't know how he does it.
You know what I appreciate when he does that? He puts himself back in that situation. If it's before his birth, it's just from what he's read and watched. But I've listened to him say, 1993, well, I was doing this at that point, or I was in college, or and here's what was going on in my life. So I remember seeing that movie with my sister. That's how I think he kind of holds it all together. I think that way as well.
And I think that helps our listeners connect with us. And they get to know us as well. And that's really important. Now, do you all have different areas of interest in Disney history? Because, I know from our listeners, some are really into the theme parks. And a majority of our listeners, it's really about Walt.
Yeah, I'm a musician, so I'm coming from that angle. I've been able to meet and actually work with Richard Sherman, which is just, like Mecca for me. But also a lot of park history, love the park history. And John and I met through our daughters who were in school together. Or no, it was Evan and my oldest daughter
we're all in Washington, Illinois. I was
going to ask you,
we're social distancing right now. So
yeah. And so John and I actually sat next to each other on a school field trip that we were chaperoning. And it was a 3-hour trip to Chicago, up and back. And I could have sat on the bus for another day talking and comparing notes. And
you don't meet many people in Washington, Illinois who know who, Carl Stalling is.
You just did an episode on him. I thought that's unusual. You don't see many podcasting an episode on Carl Stalling.
And then John, you're a history guy too. I know you love the parks.
Yeah, I would say historically, I'll read anything about that, but the parks specifically, and actually some of the work you guys have done on the parks that never were is so interesting. We're Midwesterners here, and how cool would that have been for us to go to St. Louis to see a Disney park, but it wasn't meant to be. Yeah, so between that and the resorts, that's if I had to pick, my my lifeblood. I love going and looking at the architecture and studying even just the resorts themselves.
And Michael, I don't think I have a direct. Probably movies. I mean, there's so much about Disney history that I am just infatuated with. But I think more than anything else, the movies inspire the other things, right? I mean, that's where Walt started, and that's, that led to other avenues. So that would be my top interest. But I love everything.
Yeah, and that's why Fantasyland, I always say, is the realm most closely associated with Walt, because that's where all his characters that he created live.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was so fitting that was the land that he sort of at the end of the ceremony that was broadcast on July 17, 1955. That's the land he enters. At the end of the show.
Yeah, he and Art Linkletter, right?
Art Linkletter,
and I think
they're trying to drag their microphone cables behind them. Yeah.
I love that scene. That's great. Well, Michael, we could talk to you for hours. Please, at some point, we want to have you back. We want to get Craig on the show as well. And
absolutely. I know he's very disappointed right now. For multiple reasons.
Yeah, he's having some technical issues.
Yes.
But Michael, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us, and we look forward to listening to Connecting with Walt every week.
Thank you. I look forward to listening to the Hyperion Hub every week as well.
Well, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We thank Michael Bowling for joining us. And remember, that's Connecting with Walt. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@thehyperionhub.com or send us a voice-recorded message. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please go rate and review us so more people can find the show. Guys, have a great week.
We're glad you could join us. We'd love to hear from you. You can email or send us a recorded audio message at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. Find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Hyperion Hub is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company or its subsidiaries. We'll meet you next time at the Hyperion Hub.